Jasmine Crockett felt every eye in the packed Dallas federal courtroom boring into her as Police Chief Marcus Thompson slammed his hand on the prosecution table and pointed directly at her with the fury of a man who believed he was about to destroy the career of the young congresswoman who had dared to challenge his authority, completely unaware that the 29-year-old representative from Texas had been secretly documenting his criminal empire for the past 18 months, using resources and investigative techniques that would expose him as the head of the most corrupt police operation in Texas history. The morning light streamed through the courthouse windows as Chief Thompson prepared to present what he believed was an ironclad case that would end Crockett's political career forever. But what he didn't know was that every illegal transaction, every corrupt deal, and every abuse of power he had committed was already documented in a comprehensive investigation that would ultimately send him to federal prison for the rest of his life. "Your Honor," Chief Thompson declared with the righteous indignation of someone who had spent 31 years in law enforcement and believed his badge made him untouchable. "We're here today because Representative Jasmine Crockett thinks her political position gives her the right to obstruct justice, interfere with legitimate police operations, and undermine the safety of Dallas citizens through reckless accusations against dedicated law enforcement officers who risk their lives every day to protect this community." The gallery buzzed with tension as reporters scribbled furiously, completely unaware that federal investigators from the Department of Justice were sitting among them with sealed indictments for Thompson and 23 other members of his criminal organization. The charges against Crockett were serious enough to end her political career and send her to federal prison. According to the indictment that Thompson had orchestrated over 8 months, Crockett had been operating a conspiracy to obstruct federal law enforcement investigations, using her congressional position to interfere with legitimate police operations and coordinating with criminal organizations to undermine public safety in Dallas. The evidence appeared damning. Recorded phone calls suggesting coordination with known criminals, financial records showing suspicious payments from questionable sources, and testimony from law enforcement officers claiming Crockett had threatened their careers if they didn't follow her political agenda. But the real story had begun 18 months and 12 days earlier, on a sweltering August afternoon when Crockett received a desperate phone call that would change everything she thought she knew about law enforcement in her district. The call came from Maria Rodriguez, a single mother from South Dallas whose 17-year-old son had been shot and killed by police during what officers claimed was a routine traffic stop, but which Maria insisted was an execution carried out by officers who had been systematically targeting young black men in their neighborhood for months. Before we reveal how Jasmine Crockett's investigation destroys this corrupt police chief, make sure you hit that subscribe button and notification bell, because what happens next will completely expose the shocking truth about police corruption, and we've got more explosive political investigations coming your way. For most politicians, such a call would have been forwarded to a staff member or constituent services office and handled through routine channels. But Crockett had entered politics specifically to fight for justice for families like Maria's, and something about the specific details of the shooting, the lack of body camera footage, the conflicting witness accounts, and the immediate closure of the investigation without proper review, suggested a level of police misconduct that went far beyond individual officer error. Crockett's investigation began with her hiring Justice Coalition Investigations, a firm that specialized in police misconduct and civil rights violations. The firm's director, former FBI Civil Rights Division investigator Sarah Chen, had spent 15 years documenting police corruption and understood exactly how systematic abuse of power operated within law enforcement agencies that believed they were above accountability. Representative Crockett, Chen explained during their first meeting, what you're describing fits a pattern we've seen in other departments where corruption becomes institutionalized. Officers don't just break individual laws, they create entire systems designed to protect criminal activity while maintaining the appearance of legitimate law enforcement. What Chen discovered in her preliminary investigation exceeded even Crockett's worst fears about the extent of corruption within the Dallas Police Department. Chief Thompson wasn't just tolerating individual officer misconduct. He was operating the department as a criminal enterprise that generated millions of dollars in illegal revenue through drug trafficking, evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and systematic extortion of local businesses. According to federal analysis, Thompson's operation had corrupted over 40% of the department's officers and had been operating with impunity for more than 6 years. The financial complexity of Thompson's criminal empire was staggering. Chen's team discovered that the operation generated over $3.7 million annually through a network of drug dealers who paid police protection money, businesses that were extorted for security services, and criminal organizations that purchased evidence tampering and witness intimidation services from corrupt officers. The money was laundered through a sophisticated system of shell companies, fake consulting contracts, and even some legitimate businesses that had been either corrupted or completely fabricated to hide the proceeds of police criminality. But what made Thompson's operation particularly dangerous was its systematic targeting of young black men and community activists who might expose or resist police corruption. According to Chen's analysis, Thompson's officers had killed or seriously injured 47 individuals over the past 4 years, with 89% of those incidents involving black males between the ages of 16 and 34. The pattern suggested not just racial bias, but deliberate elimination of potential witnesses and community leaders who posed threats to the criminal enterprise. The psychological profile that emerged of Thompson was deeply disturbing. According to studies by criminal justice researchers, police chiefs who operate criminal enterprises often justify their actions through a twisted interpretation of law enforcement that views community resistance as criminal behavior deserving of violent suppression. Thompson had apparently convinced himself that his criminal activities were necessary to maintain order and control in communities that he viewed as inherently criminal and deserving of exploitation. Working with Chen's team, Crockett began documenting Thompson's operation using her congressional resources and political networks to gather evidence that traditional internal affairs investigations couldn't access. She used her position on the House Judiciary Committee to request federal oversight of Dallas police operations, her congressional staff to interview victims and witnesses who were too intimidated to speak with local authorities, and her political influence to pressure federal agencies to take seriously complaints about police misconduct that had been ignored by local prosecutors. The breakthrough in Crockett's investigation came when Chen's team identified Detective Lisa Martinez, a 12-year veteran who had been assigned to Thompson's inner circle but was clearly struggling with the moral implications of participating in systematic criminal activity. Martinez fit the profile of what law enforcement psychologists call a conscience-stricken participant. An officer who becomes involved in corruption through institutional pressure, but maintains enough ethical awareness to potentially become a whistleblower if approached correctly. According to research by police reform organizations, Officers who experience moral injury from participation in corruption are 73% more likely to cooperate with external investigations if they believe their information will lead to meaningful accountability and personal protection. Crockett's team spent 4 months carefully cultivating Martinez, using federal witness protection programs and congressional oversight authority to ensure her safety while encouraging her to document Thompson's criminal activities from within the department. It took 7 months of patient work, but Martinez finally agreed to wear recording devices and document Thompson's criminal enterprise from the inside. What she captured over the next 6 months was evidence of systematic criminality that extended far beyond individual police misconduct. It was comprehensive documentation of how an entire law enforcement agency had been transformed into a criminal organization that viewed the communities it was supposed to protect as sources of revenue and targets for exploitation. The evidence Martinez provided was devastating and comprehensive. Audio recordings of Thompson coordinating drug deals with criminal organizations, financial records showing the distribution of criminal proceeds among corrupt officers, and detailed documentation of how the department systematically covered up evidence of criminal activity while intimidating witnesses and victims who might expose the truth. But Crockett wanted more than just Thompson. She wanted to expose the entire network of corruption that had enabled criminal activity to flourish within what was supposed to be a legitimate law enforcement agency. Working with Martinez as an inside source, Crockett's investigation team began mapping the full scope of Thompson's criminal empire. They discovered that his operation involved 73 police officers across multiple units, 15 federal agents who provided intelligence about investigations that might threaten the criminal enterprise, and a network of local politicians and judges who had been either corrupted or intimidated into providing protection for police criminal activity. According to analysis by the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, systematic police corruption typically requires 36 to 60 months to establish full operational control over targeted communities. But Thompson's network had been operating for over 7 years. The sophistication of their operations had enabled them to commit crimes with virtually no accountability, systematically targeting communities that were least likely to have political influence or resources to challenge police authority. The community impact of Thompson's criminal empire was devastating beyond measure. Crockett's investigation documented 47 cases of individuals who had been killed or seriously injured by corrupt officers, over 200 cases of evidence tampering that had resulted in wrongful convictions, and systematic extortion that had destroyed dozens of small businesses in predominantly Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. Thompson's operation had essentially created a police state within certain Dallas communities, where law enforcement served criminal rather than public interests. But Crockett's investigation also revealed how Thompson had been specifically targeting her political career from the moment she began asking questions about police accountability. Over the past year, her congressional office had been subjected to illegal surveillance, her staff members had been intimidated and harassed, and several of her political supporters had been arrested on fabricated charges designed to undermine her political base and discourage community organizing efforts. The personal targeting of Crockett was systematic and sophisticated, involving fake social media campaigns designed to destroy her reputation, coordination with conservative media outlets to promote negative stories about her congressional work, and even attempts to recruit informants within her congressional staff who could provide intelligence about her investigation activities. Thompson had essentially declared war on Crockett's political career, using police resources and criminal networks to eliminate what he viewed as the greatest threat to his criminal empire. But Crockett's commitment to exposing police corruption never wavered, despite the enormous personal and political risks involved. She had entered politics specifically to fight for communities that had been abandoned by traditional political institutions, and discovering that law enforcement was actively preying on those communities only strengthened her determination to ensure accountability regardless of the personal cost to her career and safety. The trap was set when Thompson decided to destroy Crockett's career completely through a comprehensive federal prosecution that would eliminate her as a political threat while discrediting the entire concept of congressional oversight of law enforcement. Working with corrupt federal agents and using fabricated evidence, Thompson orchestrated a complex case designed to frame Crockett as exactly the type of corrupt politician he claimed was undermining public safety and law enforcement effectiveness. What Thompson didn't realize was that Crockett's investigation team had been monitoring his activities for over a year, using congressional oversight authority and federal resources that exceeded anything available to local law enforcement. They had documented his coordination with criminal organizations, recorded his discussions about targeting political opponents, and traced the flow of criminal proceeds through his money laundering network. They had comprehensive evidence of his criminal enterprise and were prepared to present documentation that would expose not just individual crimes but the entire system of corruption that had transformed a law enforcement agency into a criminal organization. The fabricated case against Crockett was sophisticated and appeared to be supported by overwhelming evidence of exactly the type of political corruption that Thompson claimed threatened public safety. Recorded conversations suggesting coordination with criminals, financial records showing suspicious payments, and testimony from corrupt law enforcement officers all painted a picture of a corrupt politician who had betrayed her oath of office. Thompson had spent 8 months building the case, convinced that destroying Crockett would eliminate the greatest threat his criminal empire had ever faced. But Crockett's legal team was prepared for Thompson's attack. Led by former federal prosecutor and civil rights attorney Marcus Williams, one of the most experienced police corruption defense lawyers in the country, they had spent months preparing for the moment when Thompson's network would try to neutralize Crockett's investigation by destroying her political career. They had compiled comprehensive evidence of Thompson's criminal enterprise and were ready to present documentation that would expose the real criminals while vindicating Crockett's efforts to ensure police accountability. On the morning when Thompson stood before Judge Patricia Coleman to present his case against Crockett, he was convinced that he was about to destroy the career of the young politician who had dared to challenge police authority, having no idea that he was actually stepping into a trap that would expose 18 months of criminal activity to federal investigators who had been waiting for exactly this moment to take down his entire criminal organization. Your Honor, Thompson continued, his voice growing more confident as he presented his fabricated evidence. Representative Crockett has spent her entire congressional career attacking law enforcement, undermining public safety, and coordinating with criminal elements who want to destroy the institutions that protect law-abiding citizens. She's not a legitimate politician serving her constituents. She's a criminal who has used her political position to obstruct justice and enable criminal activity in our communities. But even as Thompson spoke, federal agents were coordinating with Crockett's legal team to execute arrest warrants that had been prepared based on 18 months of comprehensive investigation. Marcus Williams activated a large screen in the courtroom and announced, Your Honor, before Chief Thompson continues, we'd like to present evidence that will completely reframe these proceedings and expose the real criminal enterprise that has been operating in Dallas. The room fell silent as the first piece of evidence appeared. Audio recordings of Thompson coordinating drug deals with criminal organizations while using police resources to eliminate competition and protect trafficking operations. Then came financial records showing millions of dollars in criminal proceeds distributed among corrupt officers, followed by documentation of systematic evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and the deliberate targeting of community leaders who threatened the criminal enterprise. Chief Thompson's face went white as he realized that his attempt to destroy Jasmine Crockett had just exposed 18 months of criminal activity to a courtroom full of federal agents and national media. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable: audio recordings, financial documents, witness testimony, and comprehensive documentation of how he had transformed a law enforcement agency into a criminal organization that preyed on the communities it was supposed to protect. As federal agents moved forward with handcuffs, Crockett finally spoke directly to Thompson. "Chief Thompson, for 18 months I've watched you destroy lives while hiding behind your badge. You thought you could intimidate me into silence, but you've only proven why we need real accountability for law enforcement that serves criminals instead of communities." The aftermath was swift and comprehensive. Within 72 hours, coordinated federal raids had resulted in the arrest of Thompson and 96 other individuals connected to the criminal enterprise, the seizure of over $12 million in criminal proceeds, and the beginning of fundamental reform of the Dallas Police Department. Crockett's investigation had exposed the largest police corruption case in Texas history, leading to convictions that would reshape law enforcement accountability nationwide. 6 months later, Crockett stood before the House Judiciary Committee as they passed the Police Accountability and Community Protection Act, comprehensive legislation requiring federal oversight of all police departments with histories of civil rights violations and mandatory body cameras for all law enforcement interactions. "Sometimes," she told her congressional colleagues, "protecting our communities requires us to challenge the very institutions we're supposed to trust with our safety." The investigation ultimately resulted in Thompson receiving a life sentence without parole for racketeering and civil rights violations, while his criminal enterprise was completely dismantled. The recovery of stolen funds enabled compensation for over 200 families whose lives had been destroyed by corrupt police actions, and the implementation of new oversight measures restored community trust in law enforcement. Today, Crockett continues her congressional work while serving as a national advocate for police reform and community justice. Her courage in risking everything to expose police corruption has made her one of the most effective voices for law enforcement accountability in Congress, proving that sometimes the youngest voices carry the most powerful messages for justice. Jasmine Crockett's 18-month battle against Thompson's criminal empire demonstrated that real change requires leaders willing to challenge corrupt power regardless of personal cost, creating lasting reform that protects communities from those who abuse the authority they're given to serve and protect.